Hi, welcome to Painting with Yuk-Sem. Today we're going to be painting an evening sunset with acrylic paints. I'll be showing you what paintbrushes to use, what colors, and give you some tips and tricks with the techniques for how to get the desired result. Let's get started. So I'm starting off with the acrylic paint, and I always have some water beside me in order to thin out the paint, make sure that I can get some good coverage as well as to wash off my brushes. So we're going to start right into the dark blue, and I'm adding some titanium white to get a nice dark blue for the top of the canvas. So as you can see, if you spread it with just the paint, it doesn't spread very well. So what I like to do is go and grab either some blending medium or some water, and that helps the paint go between all of the nooks and crannies that is on the canvas and helps you to blend it. As I go down, I'm not washing my brush, but I'm just going to slowly add some more white to that color and drag a bit of that blue down. And this is an example of how you can really see how a brush stroke will affect your painting. These ones are vertical. Here it's horizontal. So I want that horizontal feeling, and I want my brush strokes to really be uniform so that I don't have some random vertical stroke that's going through the painting, because you'll be able to see it right away. Again, I'm just getting a little bit of water. I'm going right into the white again and doing the same thing, bringing that blue, the lighter one, down, mixing it with the white on the canvas, and then going across it in order to blend it. And as I do that, this should be one of the last layers where I bring that white, and it should bring me to a really nice blending from the dark down to the light. And because it's either, you can call it the sunset or sunrise, generally what people think is that when you're painting a sunrise or a sunset, there's no real difference. There's a difference maybe in the feel or the interpretation, but the colors and a lot of what happens in the sky for a sunrise or a sunset is exactly the same. The sun ends up being at the same space in the sky and gives off the same light regardless. So that's one of the things that when you ask an artist if it's a sunrise or a sunset, it really depends on what mood they were looking for with it. Now that I have the blue, I'm going to go into some white with the yellow ochre, because we're going to have an area here at the bottom that's going to be where the sun is. And I want a division of that color between the blue and having where the sunrise or the sunset is, and that's going to be that yellow ochre with a bit of white. And I'm just going over it a few times. I'm going to add a bit of water and a bit of a lighter yellow right at the bottom. And that will give me that impression of there being that line of where the sun, I want it to be hitting. And just like that, you have that nice variation in the color. I'm going to wash off my brush and make sure it's nice and clean, because I'm going to be changing the colors now. I'm going to start going into a cadmium orange, and the orange is very powerful, so when you put it on, try to use it sparingly at first and then add in. So because there's still some yellow down here on the sides, I'm just going to gently, and you can see how bright that color is right away. So I'm just going to very gently try and bring in some of the orange into the sunset or sunrise. We're going to call it a sunset, and bring it in. And by leaving some of that yellow and having some of that orange just come in, it's going to naturally make some of those cloud shapes. And I'm just bringing them in horizontally, making sure that I understand what, and I remember that you're trying, these clouds are going to be more of that horizontal without the fluffy tops or anything like that. Not just yet. And if I get some of that color with some orange, that's fine. It'll just add a nice layer to it. So now I'm going to change my brush, and I'm going to start in with some Payne's Gray with the white. So I'm going to use an angled flat brush, and that is going to help me keep the same shape as these flat clouds down here. So I'm going into a bit of the Payne's Gray. So Payne's Gray is a dark blue with some black. So it looks black when you pull it out, but when you add some white to it, it actually turns into a really nice blue gray. So now that I have some of that paint on my brush, I'm going to come in and just start feathering in some horizontal clouds into the background. And I'm not too worried about the shape right now. I'm just kind of getting the placement of where I think I want them to be. And a bit of that, making sure that I have some coverage and placement of them. And I'm going to do some right here to show that divide between the yellow and the blue. So I'm using a back and forth stroke. If you always use the same stroke in the same direction, it's going to be very uniform. The way to get some random strokes is to go back and forth with it. So I'm just adding a little bit more height to those clouds. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in with a little bit of the paint that has that touch of yellow. I haven't washed my brush. I just went right into that yellow, put it on there. So I have the gray with some yellow. And at the bottom of those clouds, now I'm going to start adding a bottom layer to them that has a little bit, just a hint of that yellow in it. And that will be the sun that's reflecting on the underside of these clouds. And it's going to come all the way up to the top, making sure that we touch all of them and get some of that color on there. So the one that's closest down to the bottom, I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to it, making sure that I have that nice touch of color on them. All right. The last piece that we're going to do on the clouds is just to highlight them. So I'm using the same Payne's Gray with white. All I did was went and added a little bit more titanium, so we have a bit more of a light color. And I'm going to grab a bit more, and just on the tops is just to add a little bit more of that light paint in order to give it some depth. So I'm going back and forth still, just outlining the clouds so that the middle is actually a little bit darker, and that'll make it look a little bit more dense as a cloud, and that the ones that are a little bit fluffier or thinner have that white. So it's that lighter gray. And just like that, we start to get that idea of those clouds. I'm just going to touch up on this one a bit. The nice thing about clouds is that nobody knows if it's supposed to be, you know, if you're only supposed to have 3 or if you're supposed to have 5. So you can add them in and really have fun with placement or how big they are, and then you can always just come back and add a few more and touch up a little bit as you go. All right, so now that we have the basic clouds done, I'm going to show you a different technique for doing the backgrounds for the landscape down at the bottom here. What I would typically do is do it in silhouette, use a really dark color and have it pop out against the yellow. But instead, what I'm going to show you how to do is how to use color to do that silhouette. So I'm going to use a bright color in the middle, and that's where the sun is shining right through it, and it's actually distorting the color. So you're not going to get that black. So right here, where that line is, I'm going to start adding a couple of trees, and I have a smaller angled flat brush, and I'm just going to add in, I'm dabbing it using the corner, and that's going to give me some of that shape. And then coming in, and by doing it in the orange, that's going to have that impression of that's where that light is. If you wanted a bit more of a leafier tree, you can just turn your brush and dab, and that'll give you a little bit more of that random look. Alongside a couple of those pines. So as I'm getting more into the sides, the sun is in the middle, so I'm going to add a little bit of cadmium red to that orange, and it's going to give me just a bit of a darker color of shadow for those trees. So a bit of red and a bit of that orange, and I'm coming in and I'm just going over some of the trees, especially in the bottom half of them. That's where there is a bit more of a shadow, and then coming in on the side here until I get into more of that red. I'm going to bring it down a little bit, and now I can go right into that red and do the same thing. So I'm going to do a layer of trees here at the bottom, and the same thing. Maybe this one has a bit of a taller pine that comes up here. And then once again, once you're doing the trees, if you move your brush back and forth, you're going to get that randomness of the branches as you create your background forest. Sometimes all you'll see is the tops of the trees, so you can just do some nice horizontal lines. Every once in a while, add in a couple of branches to it, and then mirror it on the other side as well with that darker red. Another layer there. When we're going into the sides, now we can start adding that darker color. So what I'm doing is, because the rest of it is using that Payne's gray, I'm going to be using the Payne's gray and adding it to the red, and that's going to give me a nice rich purple, which is almost looks black, but when it dries, and because the red is beside it, you're going to see that it turns it into a really nice violet. So a little bit of Payne's Gray, and I'm just going to bring the same background tree line there. Coming in on the other side and doing the same thing. So a lot of the tree line, it doesn't have to be all the same color. You can really play with creating a depth, both lengthwise as well as a depth of what's further and what's closer, just by playing with color. And now, for the last little piece on that tree line, we're going to go with just the Payne's Gray. It'll pick up some of the red, but that'll give me that dark on the edges that we're looking for. And then, as you can tell, it really does create a depth of the orange being closest to the sun, the red, and then the darker tree line being closer. And I'm just going to bring it together a little bit there. Wash off that brush. I'm going to go back to my big flat brush, because right at the bottom here I think that we can do a bit of a lake. So I'm just going right into the Payne's Gray, and I'm going to start going horizontal and keeping that nice and level for the bottom, so that we can, and that's going to really differentiate the forest that's got all those, that texture to it. And then we're going to have that lake that's nice and calm and is that dark, nice dark blue. So that's our base. I'm going to cover, and the tip for having a lake, once again, is always making sure that it's as level as it can be in order to really be able to not have it flowing off to one side or dipping in the middle. So now that I have my lake in the dark, I'm going to come in with the smaller brush again, and now I'm going to start marking out where I wanted a couple of those trees here to be. On the side of the lake, and you can just keep on adding for days and days and days, depending on what look, what feel. Is it busy? Is it, do you want it to be a little bit more uniform, like that? In order to do the reflection, the lake will always reflect the colors that are in the sky. So because our sky goes from yellow into blue, I'm going to go in and I'm going to get some of that yellow. And right here, I'm going to move this forward a bit. So right here, where the tree line is starting, I'm going to just add in a touch of yellow with that brush, and I'm bringing it straight down. It's going to mix with the wet Payne's Gray, and that's fine because I don't want it to be completely yellow. I just want to have the hint of that sky that's going to come down. On the edges, I'm going to add a little bit of orange, and at the bottom of here, we're going to add a bit of the orange. And then on the sides, a bit of that red, just to have that reflection of those trees coming through. Now that it's, while it's still wet, And this is, if it takes too long, you won't be able to do this. So now that it's still wet, what I'm going to do is I have a clean brush, and very lightly, I'm going to go right across and get that to blend. Move the brush stroke from going downwards to going across. And then I can come back in with this one and just do a couple of those highlights going vertically, and that'll give you some really nice effects on the water. Here, because there's that big tree in red, so I'm going to come in, I'm going to grab some red and do a reflection of that red in there and over here. So you can pick and choose where you want that reflection to really stand out in comparison to that horizontal glare, more or less the reflection compared to having those vertical lines that are coming in here. So here's a little bit more of that orange. And then the last thing is that because there's that little line, tree line here, that's that dark, I'm just going to make sure that I have some of that dark tree line that's reflected in there. And then now that we have that reflection done, we're going to fill up this area here with a nice big tree. I'm going to take my pointed brush and I'm going to go and get that Payne's gray, the Payne's gray. So it's that blue gray again. I'm going to get it loaded up with paint, and then from the top I'm going to be adventurous and just bring it down, slowly adding more pressure all the way down in front of that lake. I'm going to come back in, and now that I have more or less the shape that I want, I'm going to come in and make sure that it's covered, that I'm not seeing the rest of the canvas through it. As you move up, one of the ways to get a nice point and a nice line is if you turn your brush slightly as you're going, what it ends up doing is moving that paint around a little bit so that you're using all the paint that's on the brush, not just on one side of it. Now that we have that, I'm going to play a little bit with the fact that we want those colors there. The top I'm going to do in the Payne's gray, using the flat brush, the 1 inch, start on with the end and start adding in some of those branches. I'm just dabbing in clumps and making sure that I have some that are right in front of that trunk, some that look like they're a little bit more behind of it. And then as I start getting closer to the bottom, to where the sun is, I'm going to start picking up some of that colors in the same way that I did there. So now in this branch, I'm going into the purple, so I added some red to the Payne's gray. And then without washing my brush, I'm going to go pick up some red and start adding in that red to it. And then I'm going to go into that orange. And then at the bottom here, I'm going to go back to the red. And then just wipe some of that off. And down here, get right into that Payne's gray again. On the far edge of the tree, I'm going to add a couple of branches that are in that Payne's gray, so in the dark color, to show that this edge is really reflecting. Remember that the top is more new growth. The branches and the clumps of from the branches are smaller. The bottom one should be a little bit bigger. in the middle of the branches, I'm just adding a bit of that Payne's gray. Where the trunk is, there's actually no light coming through. So I'm going to make sure that where we added that color, that there's still an edge that has that Payne's gray in it. That's not being reflected. And a couple of the branches behind it on this side of the tree, not on that side can stay the red, but the couple of the branches that have on this side are that dark as well. So this area here, I think I'm just gonna add, why not? Let's add a little bit more just to give a little bit of filler to it. Gonna go into the red. Bit more. And then the orange on the bottoms. Going back to the red. And then you can just keep on playing and deciding what do you want to do with some of that color. This is when, is that on the side of that trunk, you can always add a little bit of that reflection on the trunk. That'll give you a bit of delineation. All right, so I think that's pretty much the way that you can play with some depth perception and getting some color and playing with using the warm colors like the yellow, orange, and red to show a different field of depth than with the blues and the darkness. I hope that you have fun trying it out, and that next time you'll join me again to be able to paint some more.